Robert. All right, well, I
Yep.
think we should get started. It is 11:01.
Yep.
It is August 14th. That's not relevant, is it?
D-Day in 3 days, right?
That's right.
Nothing at all, huh?
You know, we've had a lot of time to think about it, but in reality, we really haven't. This has been pretty quick. You know, all this stuff has happened so fast. When did the settlement get announced? Mid-March?
It was, I think back in the beginning of, God, what was it? There was some things that were announced back in November, right before NAR conference.
March 13th or the 23rd at like 10 a.m. They couldn't announce it till then.
Yeah.
In the agreement.
Yep.
So now we're 3 days until the August 17th deadline. That's more of a national thing.
Correct.
You know, the Naples market has already implemented the no commissions or the no compensation
In MLS, yeah.
in MLS.
Yeah, we took that out effective August 1st.
August 1st. Now, explain to me, for the uninitiated, how do the MLSs, because you actually talked to me about this yesterday when we were going over this. How does it work with the Naples, Bonita, Fort Myers, and then there's one that's north of Fort Myers, and then there's Marco? How do the four interact with each other?
So Nabor, along with Bonita Estero, Colbert, as well as Fort Myers Board, we're all together in a co-op on our MLS. So everything that's in our MLS system has to be agreed upon by the entire co-op, by all three. So as far as our changes that went through August 1st, you have Marco MLS, which is separate. North of Fort Myers, you get up into that Venice, Sarasota boards. They're separate. Miami, obviously on the East Coast, they've got separate boards as well. Everybody had a different effective date of when this was actually changing in their MLS system. For Nabor, Bonita, Estero, and Fort Myers, we started August 1st. I believe I heard correctly, Miami actually started this week.
Okay.
I'm not sure about Marco and the other boards, but
I think Marco was on the 31st of July.
30th to 31st, yeah.
Yeah, something like
And
that.
a lot of it also depends on, you know, who your MLS provider was and when they could actually get the changes made. You know, it wasn't like everybody could just flip the switch on the same day. They all have to have it made and changed by Saturday, August 17th. But like I said, a lot of them got started early and just, you know, got ahead of the game, if you will, and ready for it.
Who owns MLS? How does that work? Because we're all subject to this. The MLS, per the settlement, is in charge of policing this NAR settlement in a sense. So, you know, is that relevant? Who owns MLS and how that all works?
Kind of. I mean, each, like Nabor we have our own MLS section. Bonita Estero has their own MLS, and Fort Myers has their own MLS as well. So they have the control, but again, if it's something that's to do with the entire MLS system, it's a co-op, so everybody has to agree. All three have to agree.
Okay.
So if one is dissenting, the whole thing is dissenting.
They just don't do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Is that
All right, so
actually cooperative, Nick?
I'm sorry?
Is it actually a cooperative or
Yeah.
are they franchises?
yeah,
Co-operative.
the three here locally, the Naples, Bonita, and Fort Myers are co-ops.
Yeah, Southwest Florida Co-op.
So if you, and how does it work if you're a member of one, or if you're a member with two, where do you post your listings? How does that work?
So if your primary, you have to have all your MLS listings in there. And then if you join another MLS as a secondary member, you still gotta have all your MLS listings in that MLS.
So you gotta
that's
do it
part of the clerical
both.
operation that we had.
Yeah, so if you're a member of Marco Island, and then you join Nabor as a secondary to get the forms or whatever it may be, you're gonna actually post your listing in both Nabor and Marco?
Correct.
Okay, and if you're a member of Nabor and Bear, you really just have to do one because they're
It's
in
already
co-op.
it's already in that co-op.
All right, so that sets the boundaries. So is that new information for you, Dad? Because you texted me this
Yeah.
morning saying you've never even seen an MLS.
I never have.
I think that's awesome. Mike, have you seen an MLS before?
The term rings a bell.
He's still got his wits. All right, good. Perfect. So Nick and I talked about this. So this is Nick Bobzien. What were you, president in 23?
President of Naval.
At Naval, yeah, no, president of the United States will be some
No,
other
just
time.
Just for clarification purposes, yes.
But your involvement with Nabor is actually much more in depth. In fact, you're probably doing more now than you were last year because you're the chair of the forms committee.
Yeah, chair of legal resources this year. And every 2 years we go through form changes anyways. We take suggestions from all of our members. things we can tweak in their contracts. You know, there's 83, 84 forms, some of that total. And so this was already going to be a contracts change year anyways.
Yeah.
And this just kind of made us pivot into a different direction, working on them a lot quicker and a lot sooner. Usually we wait and get them all done at one time and then send them all out and to all the vendors and have them all updated. Whereas now with the settlement, we're having to get out everything quicker. And, you know, as certain forms are updated and modified and tweaked to basically work with the settlement, we're getting them out there. So listing contracts, sales contracts, buyer broker agreements, all these things are getting sent out to the vendors as soon as we've got them done. And obviously getting them done is taking longer because, you know, not just, you know, normally the committee is working on them and then they go through approval by the board's attorney, and then we're out there. But now we have antitrust attorneys that are involved as well to make sure that everything is in compliance with the NAR settlement and we're not violating anything. So it's a longer process than it normally
It's
would be,
pretty
too.
extreme. So for all the people that were expecting the forms to be, you know, kind of revolutionizing with this industry,
Yeah.
probably not entirely realistic, because again, we found out about the settlement in March and you started populating the new forms in July.
Yeah, and we were actually trying to get them out in May and then in June, and you'll even see with Florida Realtors all the different delays that they had, and we had the same issues. And
Yeah,
some of it was changes kept happening.
they
Like
did.
all of a sudden, new information came out of what we had to change and what we had to modify. And so,
I mean,
you know,
say it in other words,
right
the
when we got-
attorneys kept screwing it up.
they kept adding more things to it. So,
Yeah.
you know, basically right when we felt we were ready to go, you know, to the attorneys for final review, all of a sudden something else changed, and some of it actually we had to go back and completely rewrite a paragraph and change things and delete things and add things. So it was a very non-stop changing type of a thing we had to go through. But we got through it. We're still working
We're
on it.
still
There's-
working on it.
we
So
actually have a meeting this Saturday, actually, oddly enough, on the 17th, where the Legal Resource Committee meets. Probably about 5 or 6 hours to go through, and there's a couple other forms we're working on, trying to get those out quick. Final approvals on them. In addition to the regular changes we were going to try to be making anyways on the forms for this year. So
yeah, we
A
haven't
lot of
even
work still
really
to be done.
gotten to the changes that we
Yeah.
wanted. These are just to bring it into compliance with the settlement. And so I've posted on our screen the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11 forms that have been updated so far.
and there's I think probably, I don't know if it'll be today or by Friday, they'll probably, I think another 10 or 11 are popping in.
Yeah,
And
so
those are just minor tweaks. A lot of them
minor, yeah.
different contracts we had to tweak to take out cooperating broker and insert just buyer's broker now. So there's just a lot of minor modifications to some of the forms, but we had to get those out by the 17th to comply, even though there's going to be more changes to each of those forms.
Right,
Possibly.
right. So you'll notice like the sales contract hasn't been updated on here.
Very little.
Now, if just for everyone's knowledge, you have Nabor who populates these forms right on their website. So if you notice, I went to the nabor.com website and pulled these forms. It's always going to show there first. And then it will push to the vendors, usually
Correct.
1 to 7
It
days
depends on the vendor. I mean, when we put them on nabor.com, they're also sent out to the vendors at the
at
same
the same
time.
time.
You can always download the PDF off of nabor.com for Nabor members, but they're not in a writable PDF like you have in app files or Form Simplicity or .loop. So, but we send them out to all the vendors, and some vendors are quick with them. I've seen like app files, I think they're about 2 days. Form Simplicity takes about 2 weeks. So it just depends on the vendor as to how fast those new forms are up on their sites available to be used.
And you can always go to Nabor and grab them there.
Yeah.
You know, obviously the
They're always
vendors
there.
are the easiest, but if you're in a pinch, you
Yeah.
go here. And I do really like the way Nabor did it, where they break out the new forms.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to find the newest one.
It is. I mean, what they did at the top is section off. So just those are the new ones pertaining to the settlement. So anything new will be popping into that top section. I think they actually are all still in the bottom section.
They're there
They
as
just-
well.
Yeah, I think they just had a section above. So if you were looking for a change, it was going to be.
Yeah,
there, but
you're
I'm not
right.
sure.
Broker compensation agreement, Yeah, so they're in
Everything's
both
there.
places.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I love that.
Yeah.
Mike, have you ever been on the Legal Resources Committee?
No, I haven't, but yeah, I want to say this, for those that are watching today, Nick has done a hell of a job chairing that committee this year. This probably is the toughest
Wait,
year
how do we
ever.
mute this? Yeah, this is not, no, go ahead, I'm sorry. I muted you, Mike. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Getting multiple lawyers to agree on wording, it's a process.
Yeah,
And it's a good process, but it can drag out. And I think Nick has done just a tremendous job this year. And it was a very challenging year. And I'm glad it was Nick and not me.
I appreciate it, Mike, but actually in reality, it's, I have a small task force of 4 other people that are really doing the grunt work, that are
throw them out there,
huge.
tell them
I
who's.
got Adam Bledgy, who's actually the vice chair. I've got Aaron Miller, an attorney. I've got Christina Davidow, another attorney, and then Sean Gary, another attorney. So they're helping do the grunt work with a lot of these changes, dealing directly with the attorney, with our board attorney and antitrust attorneys. And then, once we kind of get some approvals done, then we're taking to the full committee to review. But the committee itself, I've got 27, 28, and they're about half realtor broker, half attorneys. So it's a great group, a lot of work. And for those that have, if you've never sat in one of these committee meetings, they take about an hour and 45 minutes once a month. And it's delightful to sit back for 45 minutes and listen to everyone argue over the word shall or will in your contracts.
Delightful.
The seller shall do something or the seller will do something. So it's a fascinating committee to say the least. So it's great.
All right, so you kind of have the basis for how this works. What I really want to get to is 2 things: dealing with conflicting information, right? So you've put all this effort out there. NABOR is presenting it, all those same attorneys that are on the legal forms committee, all the same brokers, they're also teaching classes on this now. Well, guess what? They say things differently.
They do.
They say things that might be wrong. They teach it differently. They focus on the wrong things or different things.
Unintentionally.
Unintentionally, they mean well, but what it
happen.
does lead is it leads to confusion, and that's kind of where you guys come in. Is we don't want you to be confused. I want you to use this as your platform to ask those questions, because someone said to me yesterday or 2 days ago, if I'm confused, I know everybody else is confused.
For sure.
Don't sit there and be quiet about it. And then a second part of that, which I wrote, pick on an attorney and pick on me, right? So I'll be the guinea pig. We're going to pick on the attorneys, and we're going to help you guys decide, how do you build your business with the information you have? That's the key. Yeah. So in that vein, can you give us a head start? Hey, well, Mike, maybe I throw it to you. There's a lot of conflicting information. Generally, what's your advice to help an agent decide who to follow, what business practices? What's your hierarchy in that regard, generally?
Well, obviously it depends on the firm. I mean, within our company, I would want them to kick it up to the broker. And then if we don't have the answer, we'll go get it from the law firm that represents the firm.
Yeah.
And one of the important points here, guys, is that a lot of great questions. More often than not, we have the answers, but every now and then there's a question where we've got to do some research to get the answer. This all is coming at us very fast. And even on the broker level, there are answers that we are chasing down. Keep in mind, we're all trying to do the right thing. And Christian, you brought up an excellent point, that is that sometimes there are conflicting opinions on a particular topic or question or whatever, and then it gets interesting.
It does. And I think, as far as the conflicting part goes, I mean, the only one thing I would say is go to as much training as you can. Don't just go to one training and expect it to be the correct answers or the correct way of doing things, or that everything at that point, because I've attended every single contracts class and at NABOR, and we have another one today. I think it's from 1 to 2:30 at the board.
Is that online, or is it only
that one's only in person? We've done, I think, 3 webinars already. The first one was recorded. They're all recorded, but we're still getting them up onto NABOR.com's website.
I think a week ago I promoted the one that Sean Gary did through NABOR, and that's on YouTube. That's a great one. He did.
And then the next one that Aaron Miller did, that one added the 4 new forms that we just released about a week and a half ago. So that one should be up on neighbor.com soon, hopefully. But it's attend more than one, 10, 4, 5, 6, whatever you can, because this is definitely something that the more educated you are, the better you're going to be. And I agree with Mike very much. It boils down at the end, it's the broker's decisions. So if you have questions and you're not sure, if you're getting conflicting answers from one attorney versus the other attorney versus somebody else, you better check with your broker, because that's going to be the end all decision maker is your broker. So
Yeah, I think that's the key. The attorney is great, but I don't want to get thrown under the bus when your broker disagrees.
Yep.
Because ultimately, it's the broker's license, it's the sales agent's license.
Mhm.
It's not mine necessarily. I'm just going to give you the best advice I can.
correct.
So at the end of the day, feel free to ignore the attorney, go directly to the broker. And if the broker relies on the attorney, that's fine, that's great.
Yeah.
But you got to build your own business practices.
Absolutely.
That's the best way to deal with conflicting information.
Correct. Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about this last week. Let's see if I can stop sharing my screen. A general process. How do you envision, after looking at this settlement and trying to determine your business, because you're still very much
Mhm.
in your, you sell.
Yeah.
What is your business practice going to look like? What are the steps? We're going to do a little bit of role playing on this. You meet with a buyer, or a buyer wants to work with you.
Mhm.
Go from there.
I think a lot of it is you really just need to learn how to articulate your value and explain to the buyers what you're doing for them and the amount of time that you're putting into it and the work that you're doing and why they should be compensating you. And of course, we're always going to try to have that compensation come out of the seller's proceeds. But keep in mind, the buyers have always been funding transactions. They're the one that's always been paying everything. And
Yeah, they're the
they
only
pay to
ones
the seller.
bringing money.
And the seller's the one that they decide how funds are dispersed. So it's you really just have to be able to explain your value and everything that you do. I know Florida Realtors and NAR put out a lot of different things, like how many, the 105 steps or the 111 steps and 130 steps and
Yeah.
things like
Mike
that.
likes that
Things
one.
that, the agents do. And don't just copy and paste and put it out there and give the credit to whoever it is. Go through and look at it, because some of those things you may not do in your business model. Some of them you might do a lot more than what's in there. So,
Yeah.
Take it, use it, tweak it
It's a great
to
base.
model it around your own.
Yeah.
So, for, my business is basically repeat and referral. So I'm very rarely am I ever meeting with a brand new buyer who doesn't know me, doesn't know anything about me, kind of thing, where I'm having a different conversation with them. Most of my new buyers are coming either of a repeat buyer from before, or somebody who's referred to me, who's already been told about who I am and how I do business and stuff like that.
So the value's
my
already
com-
been established.
To some of it is, yeah. I think I'll have to go back and add to it to really fine tune it. But at the same token, a lot of that beginning grunt work has already been done. So that helps.
So I'll put up on the screen here, step 1, buyer brokerage agreement. Would you agree with that?
I would have the conversation with them about what they're looking for, what they're expecting out of you, and then
Okay.
talking with the buyer broker.
Yeah, that's a good point. Don't
everything.
forget you're a salesman here.
Yeah.
As much as you want to comply with this, you got to sell yourself. You got to
Correct.
establish if this is even someone you want to work with.
And correct. Keep in mind, the buyer may not want to work with you just as much as you may not want to work with that buyer.
Yeah.
And you have to make that decision. That's the great thing about it is you still have control over your decision making. You have control over how much you're willing to be compensated. If a buyer's only willing to pay you X and you feel that your services are worth Y, you don't have to sign the buyer broker agreement. You don't have to work with that buyer. You get to make that choice. And that's what they say. Everything is negotiable for a reason, because everything is negotiable.
Yeah, it says it right here. Real estate broker and/or broker's compensation is not set by law and is fully negotiable.
Yeah.
That was kind of the big sentence you needed to add in all these forms.
The biggest sentence, yeah.
All right, so we meet with a buyer, we decide we want to work with this person, we pull up an exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. That'd probably be the preference, right? That's plan A.
It is. I know there's Florida Realtors came out with a
Yeah, the pre-property,
call it?
pre-touring.
pre-touring kind of thing. It's basically it's a non-exclusive agreement.
Yeah.
And for some
I do
agents,
like it.
for some agents, it's perfect for them, and it's what they want. And for some buyers, it's what they want. It's a lot less protection to the broker, to the realtor, but at the same time, maybe that's how you start your with everything. I look at it as, the exclusive is definitely far more protecting to the realtor with everything you're doing. But at the same token, it doesn't have to be a long-term agreement. It can be a one-day agreement. So if a buyer is concerned about just coming in town for a weekend or just wants to go look at a few properties, it doesn't have to be a 6-month or a 3-month contract. It can be a 1-day or a 3-day weekend contract.
Or specific to one
You
property.
can, yeah, you have other terms and conditions. You can add a very specific property or even a community or modify the stipulations. Of course, get that approved with your broker before they're signed, but you have the ability to tweak it to how it's going to work for your own business model.
Right, you're trying not to push the buyer away, you're trying to get them to trust you, and so
Yeah.
if the buyer brokerage agreement is a little too strong
Mhm.
for your buyer, if it's a little too strong for you, honestly.
Yeah.
Because it does lock a buyer in, then you could pivot, use a property pre-touring agreement, which I have on the screen.
Mhm.
The big difference is that the exclusive is mandatory, the pre-property, the buyer could ultimately fire you.
Correct.
Right.
It's, yeah, and also, like, I mean, if on the exclusive, let's say you show buyer properties over, on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday in a particular community, and on Sunday, they happen to go to an open house in a different community and they buy that property. On exclusive, you're covered. Any property that they buy during your term of that buyer broker agreement, you're protected.
Yeah,
Whereas
exactly.
on the pre-touring or non-exclusive, it's only what you've worked with them on. So it gives you, like I said, it's designed to help protect the realtor a little bit more. And also it's a clear, transparent relationship that you have with the buyer, what your expectations are with them, as well as what their expectations are of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the fine print on that buyer brokerage agreement says whether I found you the property or not, you're obligated.
Correct.
That does lead to one of the questions that was out here. Grandpa asks, what's your opinion of what will happen when a buyer signs 20 BBAs with 20 different agents and brokerages, then decides to write a contract with someone else who has a lower fee?
I guess it depends on if the BBA is a exclusive or non-exclusive. I get it's really, if a buyer's out there signing forms left and right, that's unfortunately that's on the buyer's
Yeah, it is.
detriment. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just like it's no
It
different
is.
than a seller signing 5 different exclusive listing contracts.
Or hiring 10 different
Yeah,
plumbers.
It's correct. I mean, in that sense, it's always good to have the conversation with your buyer. Have you signed a buyer broker agreement with anybody else in the state of Florida right now,
Right.
or anybody in our area or anything like that, to have that conversation, help prevent them from
Making a mistake.
tripping over themselves.
Yeah.
Because it is something, I mean, to see a property now, you have to have some form of a buyer agreement signed. Doesn't have to be the exclusive, but it has to be some form of a buyer agreement signed in order to show, like, well, they call it tour, in order to tour any property. So in this case, if you have a buyer who's got 20 different ones signed, theoretically, if they're exclusive agreements on each of them, theoretically, that buyer's on the hook for 20 different commissions. that they've
Absolutely.
agreed to.
Yeah, it's problematic, but it's possible. So we have a buyer brokerage agreement signed. Possibly instead they use the pre-touring property agreement that FAR has, or some other form.
Yeah.
There are definitely people that are creating their own forms to make it more user-friendly.
Yeah. And one thing I'll say real quick on the buyer broker agreement for Nabor is that it is specific to our Tri-County area, Collier, Lee.
Yeah,
and
explain
Charlotte.
that. Why is it like that?
We did that because we felt there we're trying to prevent the buyer from tripping over themselves and signing these forms all over the place. And if sometimes a buyer is looking at West Palm Beach, Boca Raton kind of thing, as well as Naples, or Sarasota as well as Naples. And this basically just protects it where it's just the Tri-County area, unless you add to it. So if nothing has changed in there, it's only going to cover the Collier, Lee, Charlotte counties. However, it does help that buyer. If they are wanting to look on the East Coast, you can still refer them if they don't have an agent over there and try to be compensated from a referral fee. Same thing up to Sarasota, where it's in a different county. Again, if you sell, I think it's Sarasota County, if you sell that as well, you can just add Sarasota to that list on paragraph 6.
Yeah, you could
So-
say all of Florida.
You could say all of
yeah.
Florida. You could say every county in the state of Florida.
You could do
So
it.
it lets you tweak it enough to work, again, for your business model.
All right, so we've got this agreement signed. You've convinced the buyer that you're the right person.
Mhm.
Then you start looking at properties, right? Can you amend a buyer brokerage agreement?
You can.
Okay,
You
so
can amend it
I agree.
up, down, left, right.
Yeah, we can amend it until they tell us otherwise.
Correct.
So-
But it's not a unilateral, so it does require both the broker and the buyer signature to change it, to amend it.
So let me show you how this amendment looks. This is actually blank, and so
Mhm.
you would just fill in broker compensation shall be
Yeah.
and put that in there.
It could be a modification of the compensation. It could be the term, extending it. It could be I mean, we're really not seeing it right now in the market, but we could. You might see bonuses get added. If the buyer's okay with you collecting the bonus, you would just add that in there. Again, it's got to be specific. You could add Sarasota County, you could make the tweaks from it however needed. Again, it's, we're realtors, we're not attorneys, so you got to be careful what you're putting in there. Again, run it past your broker, run it past the attorneys before you have it signed, but it allows you to amend it as necessary, which is good.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Are you planning on calling listing agents before you do a showing and asking whether they're willing to offer compensation?
Only if my buyer has asked me to ensure the seller is offering
Willing to pay.
compensation. Yes.
Okay,
And I say that because I don't want to bother, if I'm showing a buyer 7 homes over a weekend, I don't want to call 7 agents to find out
I agree.
if there's compensation.
Yeah.
And my buyer has no interest in any of those 7 homes.
Yeah, we're just
After
kicking
I look at
tires.
it, yeah. So at that point, I would rather wait to find out if my buyer likes the property and I think there's interest in putting in an offer or I'm getting more information, more details. At that point, I would ask that question. And, and that's what the the broker compensation agreement is for. So if the seller is offering it, you've got that form in the sense it's a kind of a written agreement between brokers as to what the compensation is. So you have something in writing, but at the same time, you still have the ability to put it through a contract. If a seller is only offering X, but your buyer broker agreement is a higher amount of Y, you can have your you can bend your agreement down if you need to, but at the same time, you also can add into the sales contract for seller to compensate Y for your amount.
Yeah.
So to match your buyer broker agreement. And again, it's negotiable. I mean, it might be a little bit of an increase in the price for the buyer to do it, but the buyer's saying, hey, I'm paying for it one way or the other. And so I'll do it that way. But in the end, it's still a negotiable item, just like anything else is in the sales contracts.
Yeah, so it's there's a lot of moving parts. So we're up to this stage. Karen mentioned in the chat that she thinks a lot of the agents will call in advance and verify how much they're offering. And I agree with you, Karen. I think most people, that's their initial plan.
Yeah.
Whether, 6 months from now, we're still doing that, or let's say come to March and you guys are working your tails off.
Yeah.
And you're working 7 days a week, showing, 100 properties a week.
Yeah.
Are you calling each one of them? Maybe you adjust your plan.
Correct. I think everybody's going to have most likely several shifts in their business model as to how they're doing things over the next 6 months. Because I can tell you, our contracts are all going to change. I'm going to guess 2 or 3 times before the end of the year. You're going to have some things coming out after August 17th that's going to make us modify it. Things we didn't realize, tweaks that need to be made. And again, I'm not talking just our normal changes that we're going through for this year's neighborhood contracts anyway. So there's going to be shifts. Everyone's got to get acclimated to the change. Like it or not, it's here. So we have to deal with it.
Perfect. So you make an offer. You're working with the buyer, you make an offer. What do you include in that offer? You've already got your buyer brokerage agreement signed or your pre-touring property agreement signed or whatever it may be. But now you want to make your offer. Talk me through the different forms you'll include in your offer.
So basically, before I make an offer, I'm definitely finding out if the seller is offering any compensation of any kind.
Good.
And if so, what is that amount?
And you might have other things to ask too. Hey, do you have any other offers on the table?
Correct.
Or
It's again, you're still selling real estate. That's the goal, to sell real estate. So you're still going to ask your normal questions. Do you have any other offers on the property? Maybe find out what seller's motivation is. What type of closing date would the seller like? Are they looking for a fast closing? Do they have somewhere to go?
Yeah.
Do they need time? Do they need 2 or 3
post-closing?
months?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
So all things you have to take into consideration. The goal is still to put the deal together and get to closing. That's how you get paid anyways. So I'm going to find out, all those questions that I normally would. Plus, I'm going to find out if compensation is being offered by the seller, and if so, how much is it? And then I got to look to determine how does that match my buyer broker agreement that I've already got signed committed from my buyer. Do I need to make any adjustments there? Do I need to have a conversation with my buyer? Is the compensation being offered higher than what my buyer broker agreement is? If so, do I want to have the conversation to have it increased?
Well, and that could affect what you think it's worth too, right?
Sure.
Yeah, because as a broker, you're looking at each of these deals and seeing if they're overpriced or
Correct.
underpriced.
Yeah.
And the compensation piece of it could throw your numbers by 2-3%, one way or the other.
Yeah. And, we came out with a form. It's an addendum to sales contract hyphen concession. And on that form, you can add that to your sales contract. It'll be, I think the sales contract is coming out again tomorrow or
Let's look at
Friday.
this. Let me post this. I actually haven't looked at this one too deeply.
This is a great one. This is,
It's a great one. Hold on, Dad.
It's a great one. So basically it allows, confirmation, if you will. So the seller's giving a credit to the buyer. And it can be used as a dollar amount or percentage towards closing costs and prepaids,
Okay,
or it can be used towards the buyer's broker compensation that the buyer has to pay or cover. So in a sense, but all it is a quick, simple synopsis. And we did this so it was not sitting in the other terms and conditions of the sales contract.
because otherwise you'd have to put seller shall give a credit of,
So we took that out because we knew it was going to be put in almost every single sales contract offer coming forth. So this addendum allows you to easily, quickly check the boxes and put in what's applicable to what the buyer is wanting you to offer.
could a buyer ask for a credit of 3%? And it says closing costs and prepaid. So you fill it out this first one,
Mhm.
and then they use it to pay their broker. Could they do that?
I would assume they could. I mean, simply because, you know, the compensation that a buyer is paying to their broker is a closing cost.
Yeah, I
So,
think so.
It could be in that
I
direction. yes.
suppose the one question would be if it's a lender, if there's a lender involved, you may want to double
Correct.
check with them.
Always check with the lenders. I think part of me feels lenders and insurance companies have more control than anybody over contracts.
Yeah, absolutely. The rest of us are middlemen in a
Yeah,
sense,
yeah.
absolutely. So we make our offer, we have our sales contract,
Mhm.
and then do you have to include, we talk about this first one, the addendum to sales contract concession.
Mhm.
Is there another form you might use instead? What about this broker compensation agreement?
You could. So this is if you know the seller is offering an amount that is satisfactory to cover your buyer broker agreement.
So you
or
call or email and you
Yeah.
find out they're offering.
This is what they're already offering. This basically takes the place of what we had compensation in MLS. So before, by being a member of MLS, you agreed to cooperate with other brokers and other agents and stuff on properties. This, in a sense, is now an agreement between a listing broker and a buyer's broker as far as what the compensation is that's agreed to be paid. So if a listing contract that a listing broker already has in there that the seller is offering compensation to a buyer's broker in the amount of X, this basically can have that listing broker confirm to a buyer's agent what that compensation is, and it's signed by both brokers. And it's supposed to, in the last paragraph, it says, the last paragraph, basically, yeah, it confirms that a copy of this agreement has been
Shared with the parties.
buyer and seller.
Yep, yep.
So
And so that leads to another question. A lot of the questions I've gotten is, all right, my buyer is hesitant to sign a buyer brokerage agreement. How do I convince them that the seller will be paying this, or that we can control that? And I was thinking the buyer has to know how the compensation is being paid when they make their offer. Otherwise, they shouldn't sign the
Correct.
sales contract.
I mean, I look at it as even if a seller is not offering compensation of any kind, you still have the right to make your offer where the seller is offering compensation. And that's the kicker.
Buyer has all the control.
Buyer, it's however you want to make your offer. And in the end of it, the buyer's signing what they're willing to pay. And the seller's the one making the decision. I mean, keep in mind, sellers are still going to look at what is my net number.
Yeah.
That's all they've cared about. You know, how much am I taking home at the end of all this? And I don't think it's going to change. And it might mean a different offer has to go in for that compensation to be paid by the seller. But again, if there's no compensation being offered to begin with, the buyer with the agent can still make an offer that is contingent upon, you know, X compensation being paid from the seller to the buyer's broker.
So
Or
sales
credit
contract.
to the buyer
Yeah,
towards it.
exactly. So you're gonna have your sales contract, you're gonna throw in one extra form, either a broker compensation agreement, or what was it, the addendum to sales contract concessions.
Yeah.
So if you're asking for a concession and then you'll use that towards the broker compensation, it's really just that one extra form.
Yeah.
You could add it to other terms and conditions, but generally,
Mhm.
my advice is use the form.
Yes.
Because the problem, and
It's cleaner, it's easier.
you and I work a
Yeah.
lot together, and you'll just text me, hey, is this okay? We want to avoid that step
Yeah.
so that you can get the deal done faster. You know, so if you make an offer and you put in other terms and condition language that you or your attorney has approved,
Mhm.
well, now the listing agent has to get it approved too.
Correct.
But
Yeah.
if you just use the form,
Yep.
it's already pre-approved.
Yeah.
So generally I like forms.
Yeah. It makes it easier.
Makes it easier.
And I mean, while we're on the concession section of it, a lot of questions keep popping up. Well, isn't a concession the same thing as compensation? Absolutely not. They are vastly different. They are not one and the same at all. Keep in mind, I mean, and concession is something we used to call them credits. you know,
Credits. In fact,
type of thing.
they mentioned that as the word
Yeah,
here.
it's a credit
It's a credit.
towards their closing costs and prepaids. Keep in mind, on an FHA buyer, right now, lenders have a max credit from seller of 6% is the maximum a seller is allowed to offer to a buyer for their closing costs and prepaids. On a conventional mortgage that their buyer's trying to do, it's 3%. So these concessions are not the same as compensation. And a credit, a concession might be, seller might be offering a compensation amount, and they could also add a concession as well, maybe $2,000 towards a carpeting allowance type of thing, a different type of concession where it might be closing costs. It might be something where, they've got 2 bedrooms that have carpet that's kind of run down, but they don't want to replace it because the buyer might want to put in a wood floor or something different, or pick out a very specific type of carpeting. So they'd rather just offer a concession credit type of thing.
You mentioned yesterday that, well, maybe 10 years ago, we had a lot more properties that were lower priced.
Yeah.
And so you saw concessions quite frequently to
Very
pay
much.
for closing costs.
Yeah.
Title insurance and doc stamps and things like
Yeah, we had
that.
a lot more FHA buyers, a lot more
Right.
USDA, a lot more VA buyers and stuff like that.
And that was my
Credits were
experience.
very common.
It's kind of where I cut my teeth in Atlanta. 95% of the deals were loan deals,
Mhm.
and you would get a credit. And in fact, when I bought a house, I had 10,000 in credits that I used towards closing costs.
Yeah,
And that maximizes the loan amount that the buyer's allowed to get.
correct.
And as long as they can use that credit towards their closing costs, they're golden.
Yep.
If there's a lender involved, it's you have to get that lender involved.
Yeah.
And ultimately, they need to sign off on it.
Correct.
Dad, on my deal that I did with here in Naples,
Right.
I think they gave me a big credit for a roof that needed to be repaired. I couldn't take the whole thing as closing costs because I didn't have that many closing costs. So I actually had to take some of it as a price reduction.
Yeah.
So you just have to be careful. If you're paying for the compensation, you'll have that cost, you'll be able to
Yes.
use it.
Like I said, especially when it comes to lenders, they've got final say over the loan being approved or not, and the underwriters do. So you cannot exceed certain credits that they require and that type of thing. So
So let's
It's
look
all
at
set
it
with it.
from the other side, the listing side.
Uh-huh.
All right, so we got a listing. Go to what's your practice for the listing agreement. We do have new ones. I'll share it here for Nabor. They also have new ones for FAR. Anything that jumps off the page on this form? Like, if you haven't seen this form, this is the first time you're looking at the new one that was updated, was it 7/12?
So, I mean, as far as the first page goes, the main thing we changed on there was line, one, oh, you're moving around, man. Line 20 and 21. We used to have 270 days be the default
Yeah.
of a term. Now it's 365 days. That was we added that as a couple suggestions came through.
Yeah, and that's a
Extended.
good thing.
It is.
Because I always like being able to tell someone that the default is a year,
Yeah,
and then they can come down off of that. But if the
Correct.
default was 9 months, which is what it was before, well, it's hard to get them up to a
and
year.
that was the suggestion that came through several times is, it's I like to do 1-year contracts. The default is always 9 months, and it's so hard to convince a seller to go past the default.
Yeah,
And so that was a good change.
Yeah.
Further down, we did, no, next page. So is it this one? Nope, next one, page 3.
well, we don't have to do like a deep dive.
Page,
This is
paragraph
the big
K,
stuff.
that's the.
Line 172 and all that.
Yeah, that was all the huge changes that we made, and I can assure you, this paragraph K was rewritten about 4 or 5 times. Because again, things kept changing. It was so fluid where 1 week we had everything pretty much tweaked, ready to go to the committee to overview, and all of a sudden something else with the settlement came out, changing it, modifying it, where we had to go back to the drawing board, how words needed to be and stuff like that. So this was a very difficult paragraph for the task force to kind of get finalized.
And
but-
it was difficult
clean now.
because
It's
we were
nice.
trying to be in compliance.
Correct.
Not because we were necessarily changing how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, you still have the total amount here. So
Yes,
let's do a role play. You meet with your seller and you say, hey, and let's say we convince the seller that it's good to offer compensation
Yep.
to a buyer's broker. So we
Mhm.
say the seller buys in on it. What number do you put in line 128?
whatever your total amount of a compensation
total.
amount. The
So
total.
that would accommodate listing broker and buyer broker,
Yes.
the big
The
number.
total compensation that the seller is paying,
The total compensation
Fair
goes there.
whether it be a percentage, a dollar amount, a variation. I mean, we have the other in there on line 130. I kid you not, in the committee discussions, one time a horse was the compensation that was offered, a horse, and
Mike, is he throwing you under the bus on that one?
Wouldn't be the first time.
but it was so the others there, just in case there's something, it could be a dollar amount plus a car. It's I mean, you'll go back to like 05, 06 days. I remember seeing all the time there was a car was being offered as a bonus to the agents.
I wasn't even born in
It was
05.
it was it was definitely different times back then for sure. But it basically is there to give you the flexibility of what else could there be? Could there be something in addition, or is it completely separate? And that is the compensation. So
Love and affection.
it could be a 1 week stay at their place in Hawaii or something.
What do you
never
use
know.
this? What do you use this section for? And this is a topic I want to talk about on the buyer brokerage as well.
So this is, we got rid of the broker, buyer agreement for broker compensation form, where most offices have a compensation amount plus a processing fee.
Yes.
And that's basically what that is. So you
Okay.
could have a
Okay.
percentage amount plus like a set flat fee of something.
Yeah, some
So it's
transaction
in addition
fee.
to it, so that's why we have that there. It's separate from the second line, which is just a flat fee dollar amount of compensation total.
Yeah, so you might see a percentage here and then your admin fee, whatever that
Correct.
might be, and that covers what the broker requires
Yeah.
on every transaction. If you
Mhm.
didn't put this, you can't collect it. Or
Correct.
legal, like contractually, you wouldn't be able to.
Otherwise, you gotta go back and amend it.
And
or
amend
find
it.
something.
I'd say that's a big deal on these buyer brokerage agreements because a lot of people are so focused on getting that percentage
Mhm.
locked in.
Yeah.
They're forgetting to also include the transaction fee.
And this, very similar to what the buyer broker agreement looks like.
Yeah,
Same
it
type
is.
of setup with it, so you do have that and box for that as well.
Good, love that. See if I can turn that off. The next part, line 138, seller elects the following. This would be we can't call it a co-op anymore, but it's what compensation would be
It's
paid to a
correct.
buyer
It's
broker.
basically, is the seller electing yes or no to offer compensation to a buyer's agent? Or,
This is a funny part, elects to permit. You and I really haven't come to a hard conclusion on how this plays out.
Correct.
But if you read it, the first sentence says, we elect to permit broker to offer this much. So we're allowing
Yeah.
the broker to the seller is allowing the broker to offer up to, they don't say up to, but then on the second sentence, it says broker shall pay, and they put the actual amount.
Correct. So the beginning of that, and we've gone through it several times with attorneys, and we do feel it's correct, even though it might be slightly questionable and confusing. But in the end, it is the broker shall pay that amount to a buyer's broker. And that's what the
Yeah.
seller's saying.
I wouldn't play games with it. I think
No.
that's our solution.
Yeah.
If your seller is agreeing to, offer a percentage, that's the percentage that you'll
Yeah.
agree to. That's
Yeah,
just
don't-
is.
Don't do the old car sales and try to hold back some of your compensation in there. That's what the seller wants to be offered to the buyer's agent. That's what needs to be offered.
Yeah, absolutely. If
So
there
this is all
was,
mandatory, right? Is this mandatory or is it an election?
well, that's what we're trying to figure out. The interesting part is it says elect on line 139, and then it makes it mandatory in line 140.
Mhm.
Our advice is whatever the number that the seller agrees in that point, that's the number that you offer. If the buyer
And I
cannot,
think if I'm remembering it was because it was elects to permit, but you might have a buyer's agent who the buyer says, look, I'm fine compensating you totally. I don't need the seller to offer. I don't need the seller to pay it. And so this allows a listing broker to offer it, but it's not necessarily required per se if it's modified by the buyer in the contract.
yeah, does that make sense, Dad? So it's interesting, the language
Not
gets
really.
complex. Yeah.
It seems inconsistent.
It is. So, but ultimately, what I think, if we go back to that role playing, the buyer's going to make an offer,
Mhm.
and included on that will be how much the broker is asking for compensation.
Yeah.
So let's say the broker is offering, they want that horse,
Mhm.
and the seller's like, well, I only have a cow. You come to that number, the most the buyer could get would be a horse.
Correct.
They couldn't get the cow.
Yeah, whatever your buyer broker agreement says, that's the max you
That's
get.
a weird analogy, but
Yeah.
I'll own on it. That's fine by me. All
I
right.
mean,
So
if it's
go ahead,
mandatory,
Mike.
question, what happens if the buyer doesn't have the selling agent doesn't have a buyer broker agreement.
Well, whose problem is that?
Well, it's a buyer
They're
broker.
in violation of the settlement anyway, so that's a
Yeah,
big
but
problem.
here you have a seller saying you shall pay.
You can't though. They can't accept it. They're not allowed to accept it. You
I
are,
think we have-
you shall offer, right?
I think we have,
Well,
we have in the
shall-
seller's part, about the buyer broker
Here,
agreement.
take it.
I don't know where it is. I think we have it. I'm saying this.
Yeah, so it's an interesting dilemma. If I think, ultimately the focus, at least initially, is you lock in what the buyer is asking for, and will the seller agree to that? Will the listing broker agree to that? And then separately would be, if they're not able to use the entire amount, what happens to the excess? If they could only take two and there's money on the table, where does that extra go? Does it go back to the listing broker? Does it go to the seller? And that's something that every broker is going to have to decide, every agent will have to decide.
Yeah, we'll see it in there. I think there's something in there about the buyer broker agreement. Because a buyer is, a
It's
buyer's agent
conditioned
is
on it.
max.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
max, they can't amend it or they
Mhm.
won't amend it.
Yeah.
You could agree to give a concession in lieu of
Sure.
compensation.
Yeah,
So you could do both.
If the buyer's broker agreement, compensation is less than what the seller's offering, the seller could still give that full amount, but it could be split towards to cover the full compensation. Plus the remainder could be left over as a credit to the buyer towards their closing costs and prepay.
Yeah, I think one of the coolest opportunities that this allows is if you really did agree to a number
Mhm.
with your buyer, that you tell them, hey, if there's money on the table, I'm gonna go for that for you.
Sure.
I'm
absolutely.
gonna fully disclose that there's money extra, and we'll either modify our offer or we'll ask for a concession.
Yeah.
And that way you're covered. They don't think you're kind of going after something you haven't, agreed to.
Yeah.
But separately, you could have a different approach. You could say, hey, if they're offering more, we will amend this. I mean, you have a talent, I will say, of being pretty direct in a non-confrontational way. And the way you explain something to a client is pretty straightforward. It's like, hey, there's money on the table. That's what you're going to agree to now. We're going to amend it. But it does get tricky because some people will want to put that language into the buyer broker.
And you cannot do that. The buyer broker
Talk to me
agreement has
about
got to be, the compensation has got to be very specific. There, no ambiguity to it. It cannot be a compensation percentage range. It cannot be an amount and plus any, as worded plus any
Plus
broker
bonuses
bonus offers. It's
yeah.
got to be very specific. And again, it can be amended. Whether that's up or down is up to you and your buyer, but it can be amended. So if a bonus is offered and the buyer's okay with you collecting that bonus for the work you've done, the value you've provided them, and they want to amend it, you can now amend it to be that compensation amount plus the bonus that's being offered.
You could even do where, let's say you agree to a lower amount now,
Mhm.
then you find yourself, you're 6 months in, you're spending a ton of time.
Sure.
You approach them then and say, hey, I want to renegotiate with you. Here's our new fees. This is what we talked about initially.
Mhm.
And you could amend it even though you don't have an offer on the table.
Yeah, and that's something, maybe it's good to talk to them about that in advance and say, look, my time is valuable. The amount of time I'm spending, working for you needs to be compensated.
Right.
Maybe if
Right.
it's something where you find a property quickly, I'm willing to take an amount of X as my compensation. However, if this is extending past a certain time frame or a ballpark time frame, you might say, look, after this, if it's been 3 months, I would like to have the opportunity to renegotiate this with you, because obviously my time has been spent more now with it. And I would think as long as you're upfront with them and transparent about it, explaining everything to them, you're probably gonna have a good chance of them being agreeable. I mean, most people are very fair. It's when they feel that they're cut out of a conversation or,
When they're being manipulated.
exactly, that's where all of a sudden the guards go up.
Totally.
So I think if you're upfront about it with them, you probably have a far better chance of getting that compensation to be modified in your benefit to be higher down the road if necessary.
Yeah, we're not retrading, we're just re-signing.
Correct.
This is all is the same information. A couple of quick hits on this. Philly says if a seller wanted to offer a range, this is a seller. The seller wanted to offer a range for commission. Can we write a range?
Seller.
Yeah, seller. So this wouldn't be to the listing agent necessarily. Let's assume it's to a buyer broker. Let's say
I guess I would, as the listing broker, I would be talking to my seller, say, why would you want to offer a range? At that point, I would say you're better off saying, offer what you're willing to pay, or offer a lower amount. We can always negotiate it more if necessary, or let a buyer's agent negotiate it. But
I think it's a really cool idea, and I haven't really thought too much on it.
yeah, I
but
have to
if
get more
you-
things. I'm not sure what the range, the benefit of the range, I guess. Would
Now,
be
let's
where I
say
can
under
figure it out.
line 144, now I'll do my attorney, disclosure, get this approved by your broker in advance. But in line 144, you could say, any compensation that is not paid out to a buyer's broker, beyond a certain amount goes back to the seller. You could have that where it's that direct.
That's actually in there.
Really?
Yep.
Mind blown.
Yep,
That'd be
it's in
great.
there. So basically, if you still have your total compensation that the seller is providing. and
Yeah,
paying.
so up top here, line
And then,
128.
I'll see, because it's got, you didn't tell me you were gonna ask this question.
I know.
Know where exactly where it was. Right here, line 132, 133.
So if the seller offers to compensate a buyer broker who has procured the buyer, such buyer broker compensation will be deducted from the total compensation, 128, with broker retaining the balance of the compensation to be paid
Yeah.
by seller set
So
forth
anything
here.
left over technically does belong to the listing
Right.
broker.
It would. So if the seller wanted to modify it and they said, we want to offer a range, we want to offer between 1 and 3, you would have to amend your listing agreement. You'd have to get your broker involved, and it would have to say something along the lines that would counteract what 132 says.
Mhm.
Is
And
it-
again, but also that might be a business model. If it's a seller that you've worked with on 2 or 3 different deals and they've given you a lot of referrals, maybe you say, hey, you know what? I'm fine taking just my portion of the compensation. I'd rather credit that back to the seller.
Or we
It might-
split the difference.
Or we split the difference. It might go a long way, with that seller as well.
Yeah,
So even though they
absolutely.
knew that they were paying it out, again, it's all business models. However you feel works best for you is what you should do, and everything's negotiable. It always has been, it always will be, but it's just now it's like very emphasized,
Yeah,
if you
formalized.
will.
So Brittany mentions line 128 for transaction fees. My broker has their own disclosure forms that the seller/buyer signs before going to or at contract. Does that still need to be added in? If your broker doesn't require it, I'm not going to override that. I think that'd be fine. But I think you don't need the extra disclosure if you have it in your buyer brokerage agreement or if you have it in your listing
Yeah,
agreement.
either that, or in a sense, you could, leave that blank in the listing contract if you have if the buyer signing, or pardon me, the seller signing something else stating that, I'm agreeing to pay this fee. I don't think it needs to be in both your buyer broker agreement and listing contract if you have a separate form already.
Yep, I agree with that. Anything you want to pick on an attorney about?
So, I don't know,
Careful.
week and a half ago, you had sent out an email with some
Oh, good. Okay, good.
tips and tricks.
Tips and tricks.
so
Dad,
I-
he's
and-
about to skewer me on
Had
this.
a few people reach out to me about it. You and I had the conversation, and I understood it because we had an in-depth conversation about it. But a lot of agents who received your email was like, wait a second, that doesn't make sense.
You
That's
can't
not-
read my mind?
No, they can't read the mind. So,
Apparently not.
it was under paragraph number 7. This was the email.
I'm gonna try and pull it up, so if I'm
Let
distracted.
me look real fast. You sent this out August 4th.
And then this will be my shameless plug. If anyone wants to get our articles, we send them out every Sunday. They're fantastic despite what, Nick is about to say.
It's not that it's wrong, it just needs
Clarify.
further wording and clarification to it. So under number 7, it said, don't do both sides. If you're a listing agent and the buyer,
Tell us what is both sides?
both sides basically obviously where you're handling the transaction for the both buyer and the seller.
Okay.
So if you're a listing agent and the buyer doesn't have an agent, I do not suggest putting your name on both sides of the sales contract. You'll simply leave the buyer broker empty or put an NA. You therefore do not need the buyer broker agreement while still collecting the full compensation, which is correct. But I think it wasn't clear, if you will, because if you are the listing agent, whether it be an open house or a buyer calls you and wants to see that property, at that you are working for the seller at that point in showing the property. You do not need a buyer broker agreement signed before you show that to the buyer, because again, you're working for the seller. Afterwards, if the buyer says, you know what, I love this property, I want to write an offer. Your first question should be, basically, do you
have an
want
agent?
representation? Well, you should have asked that beforehand.
Okay, good.
But do you want representation? Or do you have someone else that's representing you, an attorney maybe who's going to do the contract stuff for you? If they say, yes, I want representation, now you need the buyer broker agreement. You should already know, because you're the listing agent, you should already know if the seller is offering compensation.
What's the scope of what you're
Yeah.
being asked to do?
In which case, then you're handling it as a transaction agent, and in a sense, working as both sides.
Okay.
And you know what to put on the buyer broker agreement because you know what the compensation is offered.
Yep, you don't need to include it. You're already covered. You don't
Yeah.
need a buyer to sign a buyer brokerage agreement.
Well, you would if they want the
They want
representation.
the legal representation. Okay.
So, but if they say, no, I don't need any representation, I've got Christian Ross who's gonna, handle the contract for me.
we
and
we don't do that, by the way.
so
I'll let you guys do that.
So I have an attorney who's gonna handle the contract for me, so I don't need any representation. Okay, no problem. You do not need a buyer broker agreement because you are still at that point only working for the seller.
Yes,
You still have your total compensation covered from your listing agreement. You do not need to worry about the buyer side, the cooperating agents, or not the cooperating anymore, we got rid of that. The
other
buyer's
agent.
compensation part of
Yeah.
it. So I think what you're meaning is when you say don't do both sides, it's like you can do both sides, but on the sales contract, don't list your brokerage firm under the buyer's side because you're not representing the buyer. And I think that's really where the added clarification is. You're still collecting your total compensation per your listing agreement. You don't need to worry about having that separation in there. Again, if you don't have a buyer broker agreement because you don't need it, the buyer doesn't want the representation, you're covered.
yeah, so you've already got your listing agreement. You're covered there for the full amount. And then separately on your sales contract, do you have an opinion? Let's just use the as is. They both work the same. This is kind of what I was focused on when I wrote this.
Yeah.
You've got listing brokerage on the left side, you've got selling brokerage on the right side. I was thinking when I wrote this, I'm like, well, just don't put yourself on the selling brokerage side.
Correct. Which I understand. I mean, in a sense, that's because it does signify that selling brokerage is representing the buyer.
It does signify that, and
Yeah.
that's not what you're trying to convey.
Yes.
Now, can you make an offer? Could you write it? Right? Let's say you're the listing broker.
Mhm.
Could you write this up if a buyer who's unrepresented says,
Sure.
hey, could you write it? I think so
Yeah,
too.
you can, yeah. You're not, again, you're still not working for the buyer. I mean, in a sense, if the buyer says, hey, I want this to be the offer amount, I want this to be my deposit. All you're doing is kind of following the instructions, so to speak, of what the buyer's wanting,
In
but you're
fact,
not
you're
giving them
working
any,
for the seller
yeah,
still.
you're not giving them any information, you're not giving them any representation. You're
Mhm.
just
Yep.
basically helping fill out the contract for your seller in a roundabout way, so the offer can get presented.
You're not even transactional for the buyer. You might
Correct.
be transactional for the seller, but you're not
Yeah.
for the buyer. Yeah, so that was the distinction. Thank you for pointing that out.
That's right.
That can be tough. What else did you want to point to?
Can I go back to that for a second, if you don't
allow
mind?
it? Sure.
Thanks. If you're simply acting as a secretary filling in the blanks, and it's crystal clear that's what you're doing, I would agree with all that. But if he asks for strategy and how low do you think the guy will go, and what does this paragraph mean, and how's the inspection process work, and all that BS, now you're on the slippery slope.
That's what I'm saying. Now you're in the representation mode of assisting and helping somebody. And I think at that point, you need to have a conversation with the buyer. That's down the road of the representation, which you said you don't want. You have an agent or an attorney that can help you with this and stuff like that. So I really don't feel I can answer those questions unless you want to sign a buyer broker agreement, in which case then I can help you with those, answer a lot of those questions. So
You could make it exclusive to this property.
you could,
And
absolutely.
that way you're not going to scare any buyer off.
Mhm.
You technically could put zero.
You could.
You could put zero because you're going to get the full commission on the listing side of it still. You are representing the buyer and you're.
I would say just, be mindful of what your listing contract states, because if seller's not offering compensation, or if you have anything in there about, if you maybe you have a variable rate, if you're representing both sides, you might have a different compensation total. So things that you have to be mindful of before you absolutely put whatever number in there that you're doing.
Yeah, the contracts matter. As much as I like to be able to give people answers just right off the cuff, most of the time I'm going to say, well, let me look at the contract, let me dive into the details.
Yeah.
But generally, this is how it works.
Every
Can
contract.
I go in for a second? I would think if a buyer, you're at an open house and a buyer wants your help to fill out a contract, the safe thing for the realtor would be to have a buyer broker agreement. That way you're not arguing what their perception is. Gee, I thought he was representing me, filling out the form for me. He told me where the schools were,
Advice. Yeah, it's fantastic advice.
Why
So
we're asking you to fill out the form. Why wouldn't you have it just to protect your rear end?
maybe the simple answer is show them the house,
Mhm.
let them earn your trust. There's no violation because you are the listing agent. And then if they want you to write an offer, if it gets serious and you know they don't have an agent, throw the buyer brokerage agreement in front of them.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
John,
the
you're
same-
right. It's definitely
you, the
better protection, far better protection if you have that signed. You're definitely covered a lot better.
I
Yeah.
got another comment on this same article. You didn't point this out, but someone else did. Buyer refusal is a warning sign. And they thought it was confusing because they know they have to sign a buyer brokerage agreement.
Yeah.
So it's not a warning sign, it's a deal killer. I'll lift the curtain a little bit. People will cheat and lie. That was
Really?
coming with it. Yeah, it is shocking, but it will happen. You will see other realtors who will not sign a buyer brokerage agreement ahead of time because their buyer's giving them a hard time or whatever, and they'll just do it after.
Big
That
problem.
is a big
Big
problem.
problem.
Neighbor, in fact, is asking for realtors to turn other realtors in.
Well, it more so, reason being is because it's a violation of the settlement agreement, and
It puts everyone in trouble.
it puts nationwide everyone in jeopardy, and that's the problem.
So, yes, this is confusing if you don't understand, if you can't read my mind, but we talked about this on the video a couple of times over the last few weeks. Dad, you and I use what we send out to customers. We use that as almost like a warning sign to us. Like if they're going to start fighting us now, I don't know if I want to be on the deal with them all the way.
Or
If they're gonna be, they're gonna be difficult for the whole darn thing, and they're gonna misconstrue what you say or just flat out lie.
or at the same time, you also got to, in a sense, do a self-evaluation. Have I really persuaded the buyer and articulated my value correctly? And maybe that's why they're refusing to sign, because they feel that there's any value.
Yeah, they don't know the
So,
business, so they
what
don't
is the
understand.
exact repersons of showing a house without a BBA? And if someone gets caught or dates don't line up for compliance, I like this question. You know what the real issue is?
Get
You may not get paid
Yeah,
because the agent is going to do stuff and then they're going to go to the broker to get a check or, to go get compensated. And if the broker finds out that we're not in compliance, they're going to turn it away. They're going to say, no, we can't accept this payment.
what happens if the buyer doesn't want to sign it at that point? Where are you at with, they want to make an offer, but they don't have anything signed. And at that point, they're like, well, if I don't have to sign with you, I already know I like the home, maybe I'll just go to listing it directly at that point.
You're working for free.
I help you.
You're working for free. I think it's a problem. I would say in the very least, you need that pre-touring property agreement. If someone's gonna give you a hard time, you use that. It's an easy no-brainer. The other repercussions, Brittany, would be, you're not in compliance with NAR and NABOR or whatever association you're a member of.
You could be called in front of your association.
What are the penalties right now? I know everyone is a little
I
different.
believe on the buyer broker agreement, I think it starts off, I gotta check, it's either 500 or $1,000 fine on the very first one, and there's no warnings. It's fined right away. So it's and it escalates real fast.
So not only do you not
Second is
make
like
many
25,
money,
5, third 15. It's like, oh, it's horrible. And then suspension of MLS, so you don't want that either. That's
that's a killer.
very difficult to sell real estate if you don't have access to the properties. So
They have in the title world, there's RESPA and then there's the TRID, the compliance rules.
Yeah.
And those rules they're designed very similarly. My old boss used to say they're designed to kill, not maim.
Mhm.
That's kind of what these penalties are designed to do. They're designed to kill, to survive, to help the rest of the pack survive.
Yeah.
I think in my world, it's like $1 million a day fine for every non-compliance.
oh,
So that you don't
I used to-
survive
yeah,
that.
yeah.
That's bad. That's
Yeah,
a bad one. All
very.
right, what else did I say that was wrong?
I didn't catch anything else that you said, but
Oh, thank God. So here's the real trouble is all our videos are on YouTube. And, a year from now, you'll be able to look at it and be like, what an idiot. All right, so I want to finish up with something. This, I hope that the agent that brought this to my attention is still watching, but this one caught me off guard and I liked it, so I'm okay with it. She said, what is the morale of realtors right now? And I'll let you start. What is the general morale of realtors? I thought it was such a good question.
I guess it depends on if you want the sugar-coated answer or the truth.
I want the truth, and because that was the The issue that she had with me is that she felt I had sugarcoated it, that I'd
Mhm.
been overly optimistic about this, how this is going to work. I don't feel like I've done that, but I want to know what the morale is.
I would say there's definitely splits. I think you got some agents that they're frustrated, they're stressed. Some of them are veterans, and they're like, this is another big change in the industry.
Yeah.
And some of them are like, I don't want to deal with another change.
I would say brokers are feeling that.
Brokers too. So you definitely have those that are in that stress mode. You have new agents that are, maybe doing this for a year now, and they're kind of just getting their feet wet and really kind of getting a little bit of traction. All of a sudden, there's like a derailment to them. But you also have some agents that they're feasting on this, feasting on it because they feel that there might be agents that are going to struggle, and it'll depopulate the realtors overall. There'll be less competition of realtors, if you will. At the same time, I look at it as I feel like I'm totally protected now, which is what I love about it. I was one who never used the buyer broker
So the
agreement
silver
before,
lining of it.
but I mean, I've been doing this about 20 years now, and I've lost, I think, 2 deals that I'm aware of where I worked with a buyer and they ended up buying something else, whether it be one of them was a new construction and the other one was through an open house. Just, didn't even dawn on them to call me or anything like that. And apologies, but it didn't matter. I still didn't get paid. I look at that as I look at this right now as, you know what? If I can articulate my value correctly, I work on my elevator speech or whatever you need to do, and I get them to sign that exclusive agreement, I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable because I'm not going to have that buyer go to an open house on a Sunday, not telling me and purchase a property where I'm now SOL. I actually can say, look, you still owe me the compensation, and here it is. And here's
Even simpler than that, I think it's going to be a reminder in a buyer's head that wasn't there before.
correct.
They know they signed it. They know they're obligated. If they screw up, they pay the price.
Yes.
They're not going to forget. They're going to they're going to ask your help. They're going to want you to be involved.
And I think that, I mean, to me, I'm on the positive silver lining side of it because I do think this is good for the industry. I think it's good for
It was
realtors.
necessary.
Yeah,
It's
but
a
I think
lot all at once.
Yeah.
It's too much.
It's a lot of
all at
that's,
once.
I think that's what's probably the biggest stressor is
Yeah.
there's so much change.
Yeah.
And in all honesty, I mean, we've had a lot of times where even us as the legal resources committee and the task force and the attorneys, but sometimes we're confused.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've talked to, Joanna Watkins with Florida Realtors, legal counsel. She's confused. We know nationwide there's a lot of confusion, especially early on. It's getting a little bit better now, but there was so much confusion early on. And it was as I said before many times, it was such a liquid, every day was different. Things were constantly changing where we were trying to keep up with it and what else happening today. One thing we found out, we might have to go back and change the font size of every single form we have. So that might be changing as well. So
for the old people, it's for Mike and my dad.
help them read the contract. But I mean, it's overall, I think it's embrace the change. I think if you really focus on what your value is, and if you spend an hour, sit down, write everything you do on a buyer side, write everything you do on the listing side, write everything you do. Just it helps really create the value of what you do because in the end, I mean, you really do a lot more than you initially think you do. And, especially for those who've been doing it long enough, there's a lot to it. This is not an easy job. Yes, the commissions can be nice at times, but when you look back at how much time you have to put into it, sure, sometimes you get that nice quick deal. It might be 3 properties you show and they like it. And it's a quick deal, closing 30 days cash. And hey, this is great. But for every one of those, there's 7 or 8 that are, dragging on and a lot of time consumption into it. And, when you look at your hourly rate, it's like, wow, I'm basically working for minimum wage here at times.
Some deals you get overpaid on and other deals you don't make nearly enough.
Embrace the change. It's here to stay. There might be some tweaks and modifications made to it, but it's here to stay. And just appreciate the fact that now, you have a lot better protection to getting paid.
Yeah, I would say you have to be optimistic. There's no other option, but it is complex. There's a lot that's going to go into it. I would say we're lucky we have the summer and the fall to prepare for this.
Yes.
Imagine if we were walking into busy season when this started.
Man.
That would be too much. That would be a lot. So we got to think about, we've got a good, 6 to 9 months before things will get cracking, and I think we'll be ready for it.
Yeah.
So I'm optimistic, but if you really are putting the effort in, it's a lot.
Yeah.
So that's my morale. That's how I would explain it. But
I just spoke one who got one signed right before this show, and she said no big deal, and no, back home they charge more. She put 2.75 on the buyer brokerage agreement. But what we didn't comment on is that 40% of the country has the broker agreement already, and they're used to it and they expect it.
Yeah, there's a lot, a lot. But
And that's a great point, because keep in mind, there's a lot of buyers that are coming from states that this is already mandatory.
Yeah.
The settlement had nothing to do with it. They've been having, BBAs were required from years.
BBAs make sense.
Yeah. And so
It's
He
just
kept it short
less
and
thing
sweet.
is the
Here's my
challenge
thing, and they signed. It was
Yeah.
easy according to her.
I think the BBA
Yeah.
thing is fantastic. I wish it had been, like a stepped process
Yeah.
where the BBA was mandatory initially, and then the MLS thing took effect 6 or 12 months later.
Yeah,
I think that would have made a lot of this anxiety go away faster, but
probably would help.
that is not the world we live in. All right, so I want to say thank you to Nick for
Yeah,
helping
thank you.
so much. He didn't dog on me too much, and I hope that was helpful to everybody. And I wish you luck. If you need anything, call your broker.
Well, definitely call your broker. They're the ones that should be giving you the answer, but, I mean, obviously, it's, we have so many different, contract classes at Neighbor that we're doing. Like I said, we have
Yeah.
one this afternoon. The webinars are recorded. They're up on neighbor.com. You can always go back and watch it. So 11 o'clock at night, if you're trying to, get some work done, there's certain things you're looking for, jump on the webinar, take a look at it.
Absolutely.
Well, we're gonna be working on tweaking the webinars where we're taking like snippets out of it, like this
Shorter
one is
videos.
just about the buyer broker agreement, and have that section of the video there, so it'll make it a little bit easier rather than watching the full hour and a half.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
they do go in order as far as their.
No,
format
it's
goes,
great.
so.
I did post, if you want to subscribe to our newsletter, you probably already are, if you got the link to this video.
Yeah.
But if you're not, feel free to push that.
Real quick, I was gonna say, Kathy, to answer your question on about a specific property, I would just put it in the other terms and conditions at the bottom, and just have it, again, make sure your broker reviews it. As
Or you
what it
could
is,
put in
but-
section 6, is it, where
You-
you
you
the scope?
Could, I mean, yeah, you could do it, definitely do it. If it is just one specific property, yeah, you probably could do that.
Yeah, you could put it in the scope right there and just put
Yeah.
the property address, and I think that would make
Yeah,
sense.
so I will tell you, I mean, at Legal Resources, we've been mixed as far as having a non-exclusive. Again, we meet Saturday. It will be probably discussed again as far as coming out with some form of a non-exclusive, very similar to like a property specific, where you could put 7, 8 properties or one community type of thing into it, where it's a little more narrowed and not exclusive. But again, for me personally, I'm gonna be going all about the exclusive because it's better protection for myself and the time I'm willing to put into it. So,
I love it. All right, guys. Thank you.
thank you.
See ya.
Thank you, guys.